Hello, guys, and welcome back to another episode of Adrian Loves Defense. This is another episode in the series that we've been doing for the 2024 season. As always, these videos are not used to actually critique any of the players in the film, but simply just for all of us to become better lacrosse players. So we have a game between Syracuse and Virginia, and here's the first clip. Let's just run it in entirety.
15 goals last week. They have been very strong to start this game. Connor Schellenberger, number 1 in blue. So good! Stings the corner! Connor Schellenberger!
So let's start with the clip. So we have the offensive player right here with the ball, and then we have our defender here. Right here. Actually, let's actually fix some of these. So let's start with this clip. For starters, I'm going to draw an O. Just so you guys know, O is for offense. The X's are typically for defense. It doesn't really matter. You can use them interchangeably, but that's just something that coaches use. So from the start, we have number 2 on Virginia. This offensive player is setting a pick. Now, with the picks, there's multiple ways that the offense will set up the picks. One, there's the traditional pick where they will stop and they'll just actually set the pick in entirety. And the other is where they're jogging up to the pick, but then they're actually going to slip off. So you can imagine they're running up here, but then they fake pick and they slip off. And this confuses the defenders, ultimately causing a 2-on-1 where they can just slip off the pass and feed it in for a dunk with the offensive player. Now, what's important to understand here is that as these picks are happening, we really have to have solid communication with our on-ball defender so he can know what direction the pick is coming from. So here, what you'd want to be calling out is pick left, or if the pick is coming on the right, pick right. The other piece too, as the defensive player, what's really important is as you go through college, you'll have to develop a skill set to be able to glance and see where the pick is coming from. So that way you can know to go over the top of the pick, or you can know to go underneath the pick. And in some scenarios, if you can't, understanding, hey, I might need to kind of blast through the pick. Now, that's obviously not our favorite option because it's going to slow us down and not allow us to cover the ball completely. So those are the first important things that we have to understand as the defenseman. The other important piece is understanding the guy that we're covering and his offensive tendencies. As a rule of thumb, what's really important to know is that a solid poke check typically will lead to good on-ball defense. So when we roll this clip here,
this game. Connor
he actually never really has a poke check on the offensive player, right? There's never a point in which he has closed the space to actually really cover the ball, right? So if we're just rolling it back a little bit, starting from here, he never really gets
Connor
that
Schellenberger, number 1.
Right? It's only until this point where the offensive player is now coming around and getting into the middle to get the shot off. The other piece that we also want to note here is that if we can't get a piece of him, what's important is that we force the offensive player to go high and wide, away from the goal, right? Away from the goal. This is really important because it's going to force him to either pass the ball next in its ball rotation, or it's going to force him to go further out, which gives us more time, and time again favors defense. But effectively, either of those scenarios are more beneficial than allowing the offensive player to come around and cut the angle. And that's really important, right? Because at its core, the offense is going to get topside. The offense is going to break GLE and get above the goal and get to 5-5. So what it really comes down to is how do we play it once an offensive player gets topside or beats us topside. We want to push them as far away from the net. Now, the other piece that we also need to do as defensemen are if we're the off-ball defenders, right? And what you'll hear a lot of coaches say, and it really is true, but you have to become actually a better off-ball defender than an on-ball defender. And the reason being is that if you think about it, unless if you're the cover guy on a team in Division I lacrosse, roughly you're only playing on-ball defense maybe 10 to 15% of the game. Majority of the time, that 85%, let's call it, is being an off-ball defenseman. So the other piece that happens in this clip is Syracuse never really establishes who the one slide is. It looks like he could be a potential one slide. It looks like he could also be a potential one slide. But what's important is that regardless of who is the one slide, it's more important that someone is ready to go, right? Someone just has to be ready to go. And if you don't have that established, then it makes it an easier choice for the offensive player to know, hey, I can just go in because they don't really have a slide established to stop me. I can just go in and take a shot. So it's really important to fundamentally call out that one slide. And then as always, as we've talked about in other times on this channel, if I have a one slide, I effectively need a two slide. So different teams will play this differently, but I'm just going to show you one potential way to have this written up. So you have your guy on ball who's covering. This guy, let's say he's your one slide. This guy right here will be your two slide. And sometimes you'll hear it called as the fill, the two slide, or the fill. They're used interchangeably, really. But effectively, a one slide is your first slide. And the difference between a two and a fill is that a two slide is an actual slide. Like he's the second slide, whereas the fill is more so they're filling in and helping from the one slide who just left an on ball or who just left his player he was covering. So really, the two and the fill are used interchangeably, but in actuality, they're actually two very different terms. But more or less, in the lacrosse world, you'll hear them used interchangeably. So what's important is the relationship that also happens with the one and the two slide. These two players are on a chain. It's almost as if they act in unison. So if he goes, he fills, right? If he goes, he fills. And it's what's important to note here is that the two slide is not just filling to an area. He's not filling to just this spot. He's more so filling to the offensive player that 35, our one slide, was just covering. So it's more important for him to be filling to that spot. Now let's talk about a couple other things that you'll hear people talk about. The other things are the adjacents. So this guy is technically an adjacent. Now you might ask, why doesn't this guy slide? And the reason why this guy doesn't slide is because if he slides, he has an adjacent pass that he can just make right forward. Literally, if you just think about, sorry, let's actually backtrack a little bit. Delete this. But if you're thinking about this logically, this guy's sliding adjacent. You have to also think about what the offensive player is seeing. And I think a lot of times defensemen, we don't think about what does the offensive player see. If I slide straight to his face, he sees the next guy that's wide open, the offensive player. He's not really in the screen right now, but this guy is wide open. and he has a step down on our goalie. So that's typically why we don't slide adjacent. Now, some teams do slide adjacent. And in scenarios where they slide adjacent, then it's the same concept. If I'm the one sliding adjacent, this guy's my 2 slide. And I need to pull him on a chain with me. So now he, let's clear this up a little bit again. He, as in the 2 slide, will go to this offensive player who's out of the screen right now. And this guy, obviously he was our 1 slide, right? So he's just sliding over. But that's how it works with adjacents. But typically you don't slide adjacent for that reason, just because of the risk. The last piece also to this, and this didn't get played out in entirety, but if I'm sliding, right, if I'm the 1 slide and I slide over, it's really important that I position myself so that the slide is easier to make, right? So if I'm the 1 slide, I want to position myself maybe right here because it's just a shorter slide. And what's also important is that if I'm positioning myself as the 1 slide to be in an easier position, this 2 slide is also semi-positioning himself so it's an easier position for him to fill in, right? So there's, again, that relationship between the 1 slide and the 2 slide. They're really almost as if they're on a chain together. Okay? The last piece, I know I said the last piece, but this is pretty much the final piece to it, is that if I'm the 1 slide and I'm sliding, again, our 1 slide's here, our 2 slide is here. When I slide and I get to the offensive player and I meet him, it is very important that I communicate to the on-ball defensive player to recover to the hub. So different teams have different sayings, but effectively the most common saying that you'll hear in college lacrosse is fire. And fire basically indicates, hey, we're sliding and we're going through a full rotation. Now, the way that we played it in college is we would use different terms. So we had 2 different sayings: fire slide, and then fire go, which is pretty much the same thing. The last term we would also use is fire stay, and I'll explain each one of these. Fire would indicate that we are simply going to slide, or we're anticipating that we will need to slide. Okay? Fire go, or fire, effectively just like fire go, more or less they're the same thing, sorry. That basically indicates to the on-ball defender that he needs to go back into the hub. Because if he wastes any additional time where he's deciding, I'm kind of on this guy, but I don't really feel like I need a slide, what he is causing is he's causing a lot of pressure on our splitter, who's guarding this guy and this guy. And that pressure allows the offensive player to make a pass to either one of these offensive players. Let's clear it up again. Right? So just imagine if we slide and this guy decides to just camp out, there's effectively a 2-on-1 on this backside, right? This guy's guarding these 2 offensive players. So if he's just camping out on ball, it's putting a lot of pressure on this defender to cover these 2 guys. So he needs to actually, once he gets slid to, and that's why we have the sayings, right? We say fire go so that the on-ball defender knows to go back into the hub. Whereas fire stay indicates to the offensive player, I need to stay on the ball because I'm playing a good job on defense. The fire was just indicating, hey, we're planning on sliding, we're anticipating on sliding, but effectively, you know what, we're deciding not to do it because you're playing such good on-ball defense. We just want you to stay. So fire stay. And I go through all of these examples just so you guys can get a kind of a sense on how, like what you'd be feeling or what's kind of going on the field at the Division I level. Just so you guys can kind of get a sense and taste of it. But it's really not that complicated when you come to think about it. So let's just play the clip in entirety and finish it one more time.
In blue. So good! Stings the corner! Connor Schellenberger! I mentioned moments ago, what will define this game defensively for Syracuse is how they play the pick game. Schellenberger gets a pick on him 9 times out of 10 when he's dodging, and he's so smooth and smart to know that he's shot ready once he comes out of that